Dear all, today we are going to discuss about the thermal pollution. So thermal pollution refers to the rise in temperature of natural water bodies due to the excess heat released from the human activities. So it is considered a type of water pollution because this added heat negatively affects the aquatic life. So when the water temperature rises, the level of the dissolved oxygen decreases. The oxygen is essential for the aquatic organisms like fish to survive in the water. The reduced oxygen levels can create stressful or even deadly conditions, leading to the disruption of the entire ecosystem. So another contributing factors of this thermal pollution is the deforestation. So we are cutting the trees randomly without thinking that what will happen in the future. So these trees provide shade to the water bodies. They are releasing oxygen to the environment, and also they are helping to regulate the temperature. So when these trees are cut down, so more sunlight reaches the water, and finally it is increasing the temperature of the water. So in conclusion, we can say that thermal pollution disrupt like the ecological balance of the aquatic system by alternating the temperature and the oxygen levels, making it a serious environmental issue. So, thermal pollution is the harmful increase, or sometimes it can also be decrease. So, in the temperature of the natural water bodies like rivers, lakes, or oceans due to human activities. So, it usually happens when the industries or the power plants release hot water used for cooling machines back into the nearby water sources. The key points are, so here it changes the natural temperature of the water. The warmer water holds less oxygen, so which can harm the fish and other aquatic lives. So sudden temperature changes can also kill or can also stress the organisms, and which can also disrupt the ecosystems. So let's say that a power plant discharging heated water into the river or lakes, and finally, so it is basically like contaminating the water either by the releasing the oil or releasing the other waste toxic chemicals, or also by releasing the hot water. It is also increasing the temperature of the water, thereby say it is affecting the aquatic lives. So in these slides, we will talk about the sources of thermal pollution. So here are some points. So the sources of thermal pollutions, we can see that the first one is thermal power plants. The second one is the coal-fired power plants. So here we can understand that all these power plants, they are basically using all these the coals or the fossil fuels to generate the powers. But when so they are generating the powers, at the same time they are also releasing too much of toxic waste or too much of heated water, so that is affecting our environment. So the third one is industrial effluents, and the fourth and fifth ones are the domestic sewage and the hydroelectric power plants. So one of the major causes of thermal pollution is thermal power plants. So thermal and nuclear power plants generate electricity by producing large amounts of heat. So in this process, water is used as the cooling agent. So after absorbing heat, so this water is discharged back into the nearby rivers or lakes or ponds or seas as the heated effluents. So this discharge significantly increases the temperature of natural water bodies. As a result, the dissolved oxygen level in the water decreases, so which negatively affects the aquatic organisms such as the fish or like other small plants which are basically living inside the water, and also the other microorganisms. So in addition, the emission and the activities related to the nuclear reactors, including the testing and the accidental releases, can also contribute to thermal pollution by releasing the heat into the environment. So overall, the continuous release of the heated water from the power plants, from other sources, disturbs the natural temperature balance of the aquatic ecosystem, leading to the ecological imbalance. So here is the nice depiction of a thermal power plant. So how does it work? So the one we can see there, this is a coal conveyor, and the second one is the stoker, then pulverizer, boiler. 5 1 is the coal ash, then 6 is coming here. 6 is the air preheater, then the 7th one is the electrostatic precipitator, then the 8th one is the smokestack, then 9, this is turbine, and we have 10, so this is condenser. We have 11, this is transformer, and also this is the 12, this is the cooling towers, so where we are basically cooling the heated things, and the 13th is the generator, and the 14 is the high voltage power lines. So another important source of thermal pollution is coal-fired power plants. So in these plants, condensers are used to cool steam after electricity generation. So for this purpose, the large volumes of water are used, which are basically drawn from the nearby rivers or the lakes. And after absorbing the heat, this water is re-released back to the same water bodies at a much higher temperature. So after cooling down, definitely so it was 500 degree or 600 degree, and then the water, when it is used to cool down, so after that the water also becomes 100 degree, so it cannot go beyond 100 because it is the boiling temperature. But still you can understand, so when the 100-degree water is going to the lake, so what will be the condition for the aquatic life? So but still that we are thinking that, do we have too much of water in the lakes or sea, so that it will not be affected, but still it is too much affected. Okay, so this process actually leads to a rise in temperature of the water bodies, and as the temperature increases, the dissolved oxygen content in the water decreases, and the oxygen is essential for the aquatic life, so its reduction creates stressful conditions for the organisms. So as a result, so many fish and organisms cannot survive in such environment, so leading to the loss of biodiversity, and also it disrupts the aquatic ecosystem. So the coal-fired power plants contribute significantly to the thermal pollution, so by releasing hot water, which harms the aquatic life and thereby disturbing the ecological balance. Here, the third point for the thermal pollution is the industrial influence. So the many electricity generating and the manufacturing industries, such as coal and nuclear power plants, as well as textile, paper, and pulp industries, so use large amount of water in their processes. So this water absorbs the heat during the operations. In many cases, these industries indirectly discharge the hot effluents into the nearby water bodies without adequate cooling. So this leads to a noticeable rise in the temperature of water and also surrounding soil. So sometimes you can clearly see the difference between the previous and the after addition of the heated system or heated water. Sometimes the heat can also be increased by the 10 to 20 degrees centigrade. So such increase in temperature has serious environmental consequences. So it can reduce the dissolved oxygen content in the water, or it can also make it difficult for the aquatic organisms to survive. So additionally, the sudden temperature change can also shock the aquatic life, so leading to the death of fish and other the living organisms in the water. So basically, the untreated industrial effluents are a major contributor to the thermal pollution. So in summary, we can summarize that all these things which are coming from the industry, so it needs to be purified before dumping into the water bodies. So the next source is the domestic sewage. So domestic sewage basically refers to the wastewater which are coming from the households that often gets discharged into the rivers, lakes and channels without adequate treatment. So this untreated sewage usually has a high temperature which affects the aquatic environment, and as the temperature rises, the demand for dissolved oxygen increases, but oxygen availability in water decreases. So this imbalance leads to the death of aquatic organisms, and also it disrupts the ecosystem. So additionally, so during the decomposition of the organic waste, the offensive gases such as methane and other like hydrocarbon gases and also hydrogen sulfides are released, creating like very like smelly odors and also further polluting the atmosphere. So the fifth one is the hydroelectric power. So moving to this source of thermal pollution. So although seen as a clean energy source, so it still has some environmental impacts. So in hydroelectric plants, so negative thermal loading occurs, meaning the water temperature changes due to the operational process. Moreover, in comparison, the nuclear power plants release about 8% more heat into the water bodies, increasing water temperature and potentially affecting the aquatic life. So, while these energy sources help reduce the carbon emission, they can still pose thermal pollution risk to the surrounding ecosystem. So here is another depiction of the power plant. So in this case, this is hydropower plant. So we can see that hydropower utilizing the water mass that flows due to the gravity to turn the turbine and thus turns the coupled generator. So the generated electricity from the generator passes through the step-up transformer and transmitted to the load in the distance. So from first here it is going through this way, and after that it is going to the plant. So we are using the water for the purpose, and after that so it is getting heated and finally it is released with the heat. So now we will discuss how the human activities are directly impacting our water bodies and river ecosystems. As you can see on this slide, there are five major categories of human activities that are degrading the water quality across the globe. So first one is the industrial pollution. So industries and the power plants are the major contributors to water pollution. So these facilities use water for cooling their machinery and equipment. And unfortunately, so this heated water along with the various chemicals and pollutants is often discharged directly back to the rivers, lakes and streams. So this thermal pollution and the chemical contamination can devastate the aquatic ecosystems, killing fish and disrupting the natural balance of these water bodies. So the next one, we can see that the deforestation, basically cutting the trees and plants randomly. So the cutting the trees and the plants along with the watersheds has severe consequences in this 20th century. The trees act as the natural filters, that all we know, and help also to regulate the water flow. So when we remove this vegetation, we lose these protective barriers, leading to increase the runoff and reduced water absorption and high levels of pollutants entering into our waterways. So the next one is the construction impacts. So the soil erosion caused by the construction activities is a significant problem. So the construction sites often expose large areas of bare soil, so which gets washed away by rain into the nearby water bodies. So this sediment clouds the water and blocks the sunlight, smooths aquatic habitats, and carries various pollutants with it. So the fourth one is the streamside vegetation. So this is particularly important, the removal of streamside vegetation, so which is a vital component of the good water quality. So these zones act as a like buffer strips that filter pollutants, stabilize banks, provide shade to the regulate water temperature, and create habitat for world wildlife. So these are actually very important things we need to take care of. Otherwise, we cannot really clean our environment for the future generation. Okay, the fifth point is the poor farming practices contribute significantly to the water degradation. The excessive use of fertilizers, the pesticides, improper waste management, and the soil runoff from the agricultural lands introduce these nutrients and the chemical that cause algal blooms and the oxygen depletion and the contamination of the drinking water sources. So all these things need to be taken care of. So now let's see what are the specific effects of thermal pollution on aquatic ecosystems. So when industries discharge heated water into the river and lakes, it creates a cascade of serious environmental consequences. So there are like six major effects are highlighted here. So you can see the first one is reduction in the dissolved oxygen. The second one is the increase in toxicity. The third one is the interference with the biological activities. Then we have the interference with the reproduction. Then E is the direct mortality, and F is the food storage for fish. So let's discuss one by one. So the first one is the reduction in dissolved oxygen. So thermal pollution causes a reduction in the dissolved oxygen in the water bodies. So as the water temperature increases, the dissolved oxygen level decreases. And this is a fundamental principle of the chemistry. So when you are increasing the heat of a system, so the air molecules will also like get more entropy and it will leave the system. So here, the aquatic organisms, especially like fish or other living systems, they strictly depend on the dissolved oxygen to survive. But when the like dissolved oxygen levels drop, it creates the hypoxic conditions, where the fish and the other aquatic lives literally suffocate. So this is the severe condition we we can like rectify, so that these systems or these animals or these living systems, they can at least survive in the water. So this is often the first sign of thermal pollution in the water body. The next one is the increase in the toxicity. So the higher temperature increase the toxicity of the water body. So when the water temperature increases, the toxic effects of the pollutants like the potassium cyanide or the orthoxylene or any other chemicals which are also present in the water, the reactivity also increases. So these chemicals become more reactive, and even they are more harmful to the organisms at this temperature. So not only is the water so they are making hotter, but also they are like basically making the lives, so even making the water contaminated, so that when they are drinking this water, they are affected seriously. So the next one is the interference with the biological activity. So thermal pollution interferes with the biological activities. So it disrupts the essential lives, and also it is affecting the respiratory systems, so struggling to extract the oxygen from the warmer water. And also it is affecting the digestive systems, and also the excretion processes are compromised. So the fish and the aquatic organisms have evolved to function within these specific temperature ranges. But when we are changing the water temperature, so they are affected because they are not used to take like survive in this temperature. So indirectly, so they are highly affected. So now the next point is the interference with the reproduction. The breeding and the reproduction are severely affected by the high temperature, so that we all know. I mean, here many aquatic species require specific temperature cues for the spawning. So when the water temperature are artificially elevated, it can prevent the breeding and also thereby hampering the ecosystem. So here we need to reduce this all this pollution, so that our the next generation can have a better future. So this threatens the long-term sustainability of the fish population and disrupts the entire aquatic food chain. So the E here, the direct mortality. So we can see directly that the mortality, the death rates, actually it is increasing with the pollution. So when the thermal shock occurs, a sudden spike in the water temperature, the fish and the other organisms can die immediately. So even the gradual temperature increases can push the species beyond their thermal tolerance limit, so causing the mass die-offs, and this is perhaps the most visible and the devastating effects of the thermal pollution. And the last one is basically the food storage of fish. So finally, so that and this is often like overlooked, that the thermal pollution affects the food storage systems of the fish. So changes in water temperature alter the seasonal vibration and also variations that governs the food storage systems of fishes. So many species store energy reserves based on the seasonal temperature patterns. But when these patterns are disrupted by the artificial heating, the fish cannot properly build up energy reserves, so affecting their ability to survive the winter months and also to complete the migration cycles. So as you can see that the thermal pollution is not just about warming the water, but it is actually a complex environmental problem that affects every aspect of aquatic ecosystem and health. So these effects demonstrate how and why controlling thermal pollution is essential for protecting our water resources. So here is a nice depiction of the thermal pollution. You can see that how the water bodies are affected. So we have discussed all these things, sources and the effects. So now let's discuss about the control measures of thermal pollution. So how can we really control and mitigate the thermal pollution from the industrial facilities? So one of the most effective and the widely used control measures is the cooling tower system. So let me explain how this technology works to protect our water bodies. So what are cooling water towers? The cooling towers are engineered structures specifically designed to reduce the temperature of water before it is discharged back to the environment or recirculated within an industrial facility. The fundamental principle is simple, so yet elegant. So instead of releasing hot water directly into the rivers or lakes, which we have seen it is basically causing devastating environmental damage, so cooling towers provide a controlled environment where the water can be cooled safely and efficiently before being released or reused. So the machine is fascinating. So here the cooling tower spread the heat from the hot water to the surrounding atmosphere through the process of evaporation. So here is what actually happens. So hot water from the industrial process is pumped to the top of the cooling tower and distributed over the fill material. So as the water cascade downward, so the air flows through the tower and either naturally or by the mechanical assistance. And then the water droplets come into the contact with the air and evaporation occurs. So when water evaporates, it absorbs the heat energy from the remaining water and thereby cooling it. So the cooled water then it collects at the bottom and can be reused or safely discharged. So we have basically two types of cooling water towers. The one is the wet cooling water tower and another one is the dry cooling tower. So we will also discuss that in the next slides. The first one is a wet cooling tower. So here we can see from this picture, the water coming out from the condenser is allowed to spray, and then the cool air with high velocity is passed from the sides, which basically takes away the heat and it can basically cool the water. So the next is the dry cooling tower. So it is also used to cool down the hot water. So here the first hot water is allowed to travel in a spiral path, and then like cold air with the help of fan is passed over this hot water, and then the hot water is cooled, and finally when the water is cooled down, and then this water will be recycled. And the third procedure is the cooling ponds. So it is the simplest method of cooling the thermal discharges. So when the heated effluents transfer to the cooling pond, and then after keeping some time, so the hot water or the hot things will be cooled down, and then you can reuse it. And the water surface dissipate so the heat to the atmosphere, and so that it will be basically not directly released into the water bodies, but this one will be released to the atmosphere. So somehow the water bodies will remain like cooled. Next one is the spray ponds. So the hot water is allowed to enter in the spray, and the water is sprayed as the final like fine droplets through the nozzles over the full system, the hotted system. And the third one is heated from the fine droplets dissipated to the atmosphere. And then we can also make some artificial lakes which can also be used to cool down the hot water or to cool down the hot instrumental stuffs. So here, so these are basically the human made. So as they're artificial, and the heated effluents can be discharged into this lake. And since they are artificial, so we basically designed like this, that these waters cannot be simply released to the environment or to the other water bodies. So they will be used only for the cooling purpose. And once the system is cold, or the water is cooled, then we can basically purify the water, and then we can again reuse. Today we have actually discussed about the thermal pollution. So their sources, their reasons, their effects, and how we can control them. So before I conclude, I would like to acknowledge a few reference books here. The first one is the environmental pollution, and the second one is the elements of environmental pollution control, and the third one is environmental pollution and control. You can also go through these books. Yeah, these are nice books. So finally, thank you all for your kind attention. And if you have any question, so the email ID is written here. So please, like, feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to answer all these questions. Thank you. In the next class, we'll be discussing on some other pollutions and other topics of environmental science. Thank you.